Welcome everyone to episode 15 of HR Leaders Live, the show where we discuss the future of work with today's most innovative and successful people leaders. The topic of today's show is HR in startups, how to get it right. My name is Rainey, co-founder of HRD Leaders and host of the HR Leaders podcast. As always, I'm joined by my co-hosts, Jill Katz, Chief HR Officer at Assemble HR, and Matt Burns, Chief HR Officer at YISC. Today's special guest is Cathy Gutierrez, Head of People at Glossier Incorporated. Welcome to the show, Cathy. How are you?
Very good. Thanks so much for having me.
Hopefully you haven't already regretted being on the show.
Not at all. I like this group. Very lively.
Fantastic. Well, Cathy, for those that aren't aware of yourself and also the brand, give us a brief background of yourself personally and your journey to where we are today, and also a little bit of background around the organization.
Yeah. So I just joined Glossier about 3 months ago. And for those of you who don't know, Glossier is a tech company in the beauty business. And so we're direct to consumers. We do most of our commerce online, and we're really a platform for beauty. So I've been here for about 3 months. And, prior to coming to Glossier, I spent a couple of years at AppNexus and led a number of the people functions there. Did a lot of work around performance management, global culture and inclusion. So lots of really cool things there. And then I like to say that I grew up at Accenture. So I spent a good 8 years at Accenture doing HR strategy and transformation consulting with a number of the big financial services firms, and loved my time there. But I really started off my journey in HR at Teach for America. And I started off as a really junior kind of recruiter, and helped to grow the company from about 200 to 1,000 staff in a little over 3 years or so. And I just fell in love with HR there. I think it's a great organization. The mission is so incredible. And I just fell in love with solving people problems and a problem solver. I went to school for chemical engineering. I'm a graduate of MIT. I thought I wanted to be a biomedical engineer and somehow made my way into HR. So, but I definitely approach HR in a very much a problem-solving way. And that's kind of the mindset that I have around it. So I'm excited to be here today and talk to you all about startup world.
Amazing. Do you want to kick things off, Jill? I know you're eager.
And I know a lot about Glossier, so I'm looking forward to speaking with Cathy today and talking about startup. But while we're talking about beauty, I wanted to point out that Matt has gone for a new look today. And today, Matt has decided, I think, to do no gel, no mousse. And so I wanted to start off today with Matt. Tell us about your look today and what your decision process was. And just kind of give me that.
Matt, you're muted.
Matt?
You're muted, Matt.
You have to press the unmute button.
It's my first show. So thanks for having me. I really wish the audience could see what's happening in the Zoom chat channel right now behind the scenes, because I promise it's very colorful. I actually am wearing product today, Jill. It's just a more natural look. I really want to be relatable, and I think that having 4 pounds of pomade or gel in your hair just prevents that. So I am trying something a little different. Thank you for noticing. That was really when I think about my personal fashion sense, I often think about what would Jill do? And I think you're recognizing it tells me I'm on the right path.
Well, Thank you for taking that risk with us today. I think that it's a perfect segue into what we are going to talk about with Cathy and on the show. It's when you start something up, you try things that are new and you're going to take risks. So Cathy, if you could start off by telling those who really kind of don't know the story of Glossier, you know, kind of Emily's story and why Glossier is such an interesting organization and has gotten so much press. And then I have a lot of questions sort of about what it has been like for you to come into the organization and really start up and lead the people operations piece.
Yeah. So Glossier was actually originally started by Emily Weiss. She started with a blog called Into the Gloss. And what was great about that blog, and it's still in existence now, is that she really reached into people's lives to understand what their beauty routines were. So she really got a sense of talking to people about their day-to-day routines. It's called Top Shelf. If you've never taken a look at Into the Gloss, I highly recommend it. And you can see that we really started to enter into people's bathrooms and understand what people are using on a day-to-day. You know, after a number of years doing that, she said, why don't we just venture out and you know, actually build our own products based on what we understand that consumers really want. And so from that came Glossier. And we started a few years ago with just a handful of products. And over time, you know, we've grown to quite a number of products now. We're 150 employees on the corporate side, maybe 100 or so on the retail side. And we continue to be direct to consumer, mostly online. But I'd say the thing that differentiates us within the market is that we really talk to our customers. I mean, we are there with them every step of the way. We take their feedback so seriously, so much that some of our products were even co-created with our customers. So things like Milky Jelly Cleanser, that was based on real feedback that we got from, you know, people saying, what would be the best cleanser out there? Like, how would you imagine it? What would it be like? And that's what we created. And it's one of our top sellers because of that. So we really listen to the customer. I think that the customer is at the center of everything. And it's been so unique and interesting to see that while being here.
So when you joined the company, what was the state of human resources? And tell us a little bit about what you've done in your first 3 months.
Yeah, the team is honestly pretty incredible. Given how young of a company we are, we're only 3.5, 4 years old. And there have been a few people who have really done all of HR with just, you know, learning as they go. And so I've been honestly really impressed with the team and how far they've been able to take it without having a ton of HR knowledge and experience. And that's been incredible. And that's a great, that's actually a really very characteristic of a startup company. A lot of times people start off as an office manager, an HR person, and then they like expand into other things. And so that's pretty characteristic of most startups. But in the 3 months that I've been here, I think I've done a lot of listening at the executive level, but also at the employee level. And so that means doing culture focus groups, understanding what people really want out of the organization and of the people team. And I've started to, I would say the biggest thing is I've set a plan for the next 1.5 years, and also set the plan for the team. What's the team going to look like for the next, year or so, and started to recruit heavily on that. So that's the big thing. I think listening for the first 3 months has been helpful, but in startup, you can't just listen, you actually have to also do. So I jumped into a number of things right away.
Awesome. So we wanted to talk a little bit about HR and startup. I know that what's neat about our show is that our listener base is both global, and we also have people that join our show who are in very, very large companies with highly established HR organizations. And we also have quite a few people who work in the startup space. And as you know, Cathy, I work very closely with lots of companies that are just about where Glossier is. And having been, and I'm interested in both Matt's perspective and your perspective, having been a consultant with Accenture, and so you had the opportunity to delve into some of the larger companies, and Matt's company is, a very established older organization that's going through tremendous transformation. What do you think are the key differences in exacting HR in a startup as compared to HR in a larger, more established company? And while you're thinking about that, one of the things that we do like to do here is we do like to throw questions to Matt first. And then if you disagree with his answer, you're so warmly welcome to just, go at it.
Wonderful.
So just so I'm clear on the question, Ms. Katz, you're asking about the differences between HR strategy in startups to more established organizations?
I think the answer is yes, but it doesn't even just have to be HR strategy. It's almost when we think about how HR can look differently in startup organizations or more established organizations, what do you think those key components are?
So I think when I think about startups versus established companies, I actually think they're closer than you might think. So what I was saying before we got cut off was I recognize and I can relate to Cathy's story about joining a new organization and spending those first 6 months listening and understanding kind of the pain points in the organization. From there, we built a strategy that was, our foundation was on technology, but then more broadly with an org design in HR that supported that technology and supported the path we needed to go down for a company that was very much supporting on growth. In terms of the strategies, in terms of how they may look, the reason I say that they're closer is I would structure my department differently today, 36 months later, than I did 3 years ago. And what I would do differently is I would apply more startup methodology to the established business. For roles that are very creative, I think about instructional designers, I would rotate individuals more in and out of those roles to make sure I had best in class learning. And that means working with freelancers, contract employees, as opposed to the traditional methodology, which is you want to hire a salaried employee, grow them, nurture them, develop them, and have them learn with the organization. I think there's merit to that for some positions. Any sensitive positions involving confidentiality, like payroll, compensation, I want to have continuity of resources. But for roles where there's a lot of volatility and a lot of disruption and constant churning of best practices, like instructional design, I would want to have a more fluid organization. So in terms of how they look, I think bigger, more established organizations, for which I have most of my experience, would benefit a lot from a more nimble approach, because you can scale up the resources as you need them versus having to carry large amounts of overhead that when you don't have priorities or projects, you have to find things for them to do. And then you get the perception that HR just has bloated structures and bloated wage costs, when in reality, we may actually need a more nimble design and a more nimble structure. Because oftentimes, and I'll use the example, Jill, of instructional design again, the same instructional designer is likely not going to develop your compliance and safety content as your leadership content. But when you're a mid-sized organization like we are, and you have one headcount dedicated to that resource, you have to try and find that unicorn or think about the problem differently and then apply a more agile approach. So I think that would answer your question, but that's the kind of things I'm thinking about nowadays. And as I project forward, I also think about the new skill sets that I would like on a team. For me, I think first and foremost, I want a data scientist. I want someone to help me do the regression analyses that right now I'm outsourcing and having to wait time to get the information back. I already have a project manager. So for those HR organizations that don't, I would highly, highly recommend having a dedicated project manager in your organization to set structure and set discipline with your programs. Those are the kind of things I'm thinking about today.
It's interesting you say that, Matt, before we go over to Cathy, is that whenever I speak to CHROs now about our events and workshops, the first thing they say is, what startups do you have involved? What startups do you have? We really want to learn from the startups. And if you think about a few years ago, I never heard that. Never heard that at all. I literally just had a conversation with Airbus in Germany. And the first thing he said to me is, "Do you have any startups, Chris? What's, you know?" And I was like, "Yeah, we have, you know, Delivery Hero, which are like Uber Eats over here, right?" They're like, "Fantastic." So now it's all of the large organizations are trying to be agile and lean and move quickly and kind of, and then it's funny, but then all of the startups come to me saying, "We want to speak to the big companies and see how they got there." And I'm like, "Really? No, guys, stay where you are. You're in the right. Don't do that." And they're like, "What do you mean? We want to know how to be you know." I'm like, "No, trust me. You're doing the right thing. You're in the winning position right now." So I'm just wanting to reflect what you said, Matt. I'm hearing this from all of the senior leaders over the last 2 years now. They're really getting out of their office and going, and because also they're the same companies that are disrupting them as well. So they're like, we have to understand how to be agile and completely restructure. For example, Nestle just threw their HR strategy out the window and just started from scratch. And it was just like a big deal at the time. Everyone was like, "Oh my God." And like, well, we have to do this. Otherwise we're not going to, maybe we're not going to exist if we're going to be very dramatic about it as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I kind of echo what you're saying, Chris. I think there are three big things that I see as being like differentiators between the two sizes of company. And this is the smallest company I've been at in a very long time. AppNexus was closer to 1,000 employees, and we were much more a late stage startup. And then Accenture was like 300,000 employees, and I was working with the big banks here in New York. So they were all in the six figures in terms of employee size. So I think the big difference is risk tolerance, honestly. And at a much smaller company, you should take many more risks in HR and in designing your programs. So I think that's the big learning. When I went to AppNexus in particular, I remember I had to shed a lot of that risk kind of feeling like, can I really do this? I can do this? Okay. But the change management of this is going to take us 6 months. You know, like I had to shed that and say, at a much smaller company, you can work so much faster, and you should work so much faster. I remember, you know, at AppNexus, we decided to put total reward statements in place. And I said, "That's crazy. That's going to take us 6 months, 3 to 6 months." And we did it in 6 weeks. You know, it's just incredible what you can do in these smaller organizations. And you have to not use size as an excuse. So I think innovation can be so much greater in a startup. I think the other big difference, though, that I'm finding is educating. So there's a lot of education that needs to go on with the company around what HR is and what HR isn't. And now you have the opportunity at a much smaller company to say, "I'm here to help you think through problems, but I'm not solving your problems for you." And that's a really big differentiator between some of the larger organizations that I've been at or I've consulted with. A lot of times you have businesses expecting HR to solve their problems or do all the administrative work. Just bring me, you know, fantastic candidates on a silver platter. And I think what's nice about being at a smaller org, I can actually help to set the culture of what HR should be and how we can empower the business. And I like to use the word co-create with them versus doing things for them. So those are the big differences I'm seeing, is educating and then the innovation. There's no question. You can do so much more at a much smaller company.
I think Cathy's right. And I would just add that I think those small companies have a higher tolerance for risk.
Yes.
So, you know, it's not only, you know, the hardest thing for me going from a large organization to a small organization was, to your point, understanding that they don't expect perfection. In big companies, you have meetings, you have committees, when you deliver that product to your executive group, if there's a typo in that document, you will never hear the end of it. But in a startup, if it's perfect, they ask you why it took so long, because they know you could deliver to them 6 months earlier at a less perfect state. So it's a completely different methodology. And I actually think that, you know, why a lot of these organizations, these big companies, are looking to startups, not only for the disruption pieces, they understand that the change cycles are so much faster nowadays. They understand they don't have a 2-year, 3-year window to be able to launch initiatives. And they understand that they have to adapt much more quickly. And startups do a great job of that, you know, best viable product type methodology where you're just putting something out there with 80% with speed, and then you're tweaking it along the way because you know that 3 years from now that program is thrown away and replaced with another one anyway. So that's the type of thinking I think we need to disseminate more through the HR businesses. Don't overcomplicate things. Give them 80% of your best final product with speed. Iterate, get lots and lots of feedback, and just get on with it.
Most of the time it changes anyway. We know that, right? Most of the time we spend all that time getting it perfect or potentially perfect, and it changes it anyway. So you might as well put it out there and then get the feedback straight away. And then you actually be a lot quicker.
Well, what's interesting is, I have also, as most of our viewers know, I've worked in really, really small startups. I worked in mid-sized companies, and most recently come from a very, very large, very established organization. And Matt, you make a really interesting point, which if you think about it is actually counterintuitive. You might argue that in a larger company, there should be more tolerance for risk because there's far more resources, there are far more nets to catch you if something falls through. There are far more people that can jump in on an initiative. And so it's kind of ironic. The truth is, in a startup organization, and I work with a lot of startup clients, when you do throw something at the wall and it hits, you got to go. And oftentimes the stakes are higher. You fail fast. Something can actually splatter. Whereas in a large organization, for something to really, really fail, the trajectory to fall down is so much longer. And so, we talked a lot about that in the large company that I was in, which is the risks that feel like big risks. How big of a risk are they really? And it makes me think a lot about one of my very favorite TED Talks. And I really need to memorize the name of the speaker because it was called Fear Setting. Has anyone seen this TED Talk?
No.
It changed my life. And so what I owe back to this group after this particular episode is which TED Talk it is, and we'll post the link together with Chris, is a gentleman who talked about the fact that we go through our lives in corporate America setting goals. We set the goals, we set the milestones, and we go after the goals. But this guy said, we live so much of our lives focused on the fear of failing and the fear of what could go wrong. And so he put together a model called Fear Setting, where you actually write out what your very biggest fears are, what could go wrong, and how likely they are to go wrong, and what could happen along that trajectory. And he uses it as a brilliant model to get people to see that the worst case scenario in most risks is actually not that bad. And I personally found it to be incredibly inspiring, and I try to use that model a lot when I'm working with clients around, so what if this really fails? What's actually going to happen? What's the cost?
It's Tim Ferriss, by the way. Yeah, Tim Ferriss.
I knew it was someone that's not very well known.
Yeah.
I was about to say that, Joe. I didn't know there was sarcasm there, Joe. For a second, I was like, really? I actually have seen it, Joe. Sorry, I saw it. And one of the things I took away, which I love, is one of the things he challenges people to do is just like go out in public and just randomly just lay on the floor in a random location. So he was saying he used to do it in Starbucks. He'd walk into Starbucks in a line and just lay down on the floor. Just out of nowhere, just lay down on the floor and experience it and train yourself to be in uncomfortable situations and run towards those uncomfortable situations. And because the more you experience uncomfortable situations, you get used to it and you train yourself to embrace it. And I really love that because I'm obviously I am a startup, so every day I'm running towards an uncomfortable situation, just growing the business, right? And you do get used to it. And I think coming from a sports background and stuff like that, where it's very competitive, you get used to losing a lot. And I think that's something which has really helped me as a startup, is we're used to losing, to failure, and then you just drive forward, right? And understand you have to go through that. So I'll definitely link that up because it is a great episode. I don't know why I didn't remember that, Jill, but thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
It's a great one. I if you wouldn't mind, I don't know if your camera allows, but I think that we would all love to see you get on the floor.
No, I'm not doing that, Jill. I'll follow the process. The process, by the way, is define, prevent, repair. That's the 3-step process that you ask to go through as well. So
it's fantastic.
If anyone is interested. Cathy, now you've been in the startup, if you go back to a large corporate, what would you take away from what you've learned? I know you've only been there not too long, but already from what you've experienced, what do you feel that you've taken away that if you went back to a large organization that you could, what would you look at differently? You know, how would you approach it? Just out of interest.
I think one of the big things I would try to bring back with me is this agile approach and this ability to take more risks and do it in the context of perhaps, you know, more pilots, more kind of getting in there. If I think about HR in particular and the business partner role, which is something that, you know, we're thinking about at Glossier, I would say I almost would want to start from scratch with a business partner model and really flip it on its head and say you don't really need business partners. If you have great leaders at a company, they're almost redundant. Like, so much of what a business partner is doing is in some ways making up for some of those things that leaders really should have. And so I would want to figure that out. I don't know how you can figure it out at a much larger organization. I'm trying to figure it out now because I'm noticing some of the things that an HR business partner typically does should just be done by a leader. Mm-hmm. Design, change management, performance management, the tough conversations, misalignment, right? All of those things are really leadership qualities and sit squarely in the leadership bucket. Where HR can help is more to advise. And, so that those are the things I would want to figure out, like, how can I change that? And we're doing it now. But I think that's the big thing. And then the other thing would probably be to listen to your employees a lot. Like, have regular kind of focus groups, town halls with your employees, and cycle through that as much as you possibly can, because you'll hear a lot when you talk to employees directly versus through a survey. Like, a survey is fine, but human to human is really important.
Those two things are linked. And I would say there's a couple things. First off, I totally agree with you. With the traditional HRBP role, sets it up so that your business partner, whatever function they happen to perform in, can easily abdicate authority to HR, because that's their responsibility. They handle this part, and I handle the operation, which in most organizations is run by people, but let's not go there. So there's that. So that's one issue with the model. The second issue with the model is that in an operational environment in particular, there's a perception that if you're not physically and actively involved in something, that you're not adding value. So consultation or coaching is seen as a luxury in an operational environment in some cases, whereas roll your sleeves up and get to work kind of is some of the methodology you deal with some leaders. So what we've done in our organization, Cathy, is, and we're not perfect. I mean, we have a long way to go to define our relationship. And I introduced HRBPs about 18 months ago in a 21-year-old company, was we use data as the impetus to drive the conversation. So previously in the organization, we had 2 data points from HR, turnover and wages. That's all we looked at. That's all we managed. Now we have 76 data points, and we spent the last 9 months just scorecarding, report cards, dashboards, showing the business the other data points in HR that we can collect, and educating them on how some of their activities influence that result. Now, the next model, which I think is, to answer your question more specifically, what I'm looking forward to in terms of changing the culture of the HRBP operational audience is we're flipping the analytics model on its head and going predictive with it. So that an HRBP can say, hey, these 3 factors tell us 87% of the time that this is going to be a likely result. We should fix this issue now so that we're not reacting to it 6 months from now. That completely changes the conversation between the HRBP and their business partner, because today it's, I have a problem, come and fix it for me. In the future, it's, I see you're going to have a problem, business partner. Let me help you fix it together before it becomes an issue. So it completely changes the dynamic. And I'm optimistic that that's going to have a dramatic impact on that relationship, but I'll keep you posted on it.
I'm super curious to understand if it ends up, if the profile then of that business partner looks completely different. Like, they're analytically minded, They're looking at data. They see people this is terrible to say, but they see people as data points, which is good. You also need to see them as humans.
That's the balance we need to find, right? That's a big
exactly. Like you can't think of it as a resource and a data point, but I love that idea of like, that's their entryway. That's the value they can add back. And there is this notion of a coaching culture that I'm trying to really understand what companies have this and how we can build that here from the ground up, because I think that's how people actually learn and grow, versus attending a 3-hour, learning and development session and then walking out the door and forgetting all about it. So that's a coach who understands data and can do predictive analytics. Like, I'm sure there are tons of them out there.
No, that's the difference. You don't have both. We're seeing that on our, we have an analytics series, and the soft skills is what's missing, right?
You need three.
Totally.
Yeah, you see
need
it.
to synthesize the information because there's too much of it. You need to curate it. You need to tell the story. So if you have those three competencies within your HR organization, now if you could find the unicorn that can do great analysis and synthesize information and then spit it out in a compelling story, hire them immediately. Just find them a job and give them that role. But for most organizations, it's finding a combination of those two. So we have a centralized hub that does the analytics for us and helps us define where the opportunities are. And then we transition to the business partner, who then in that conversation, that's when the translation occurs for the communication, the messaging to the business partner, and to the operational partner in this case. So that's how we solve for that problem. But I agree with you. Finding those competencies in one individual is inherently difficult. It's possible. They're just very, very rare. They're usually in consulting. So you have to find a combination of those competencies with multiple people to execute this on scale.
Yeah, I think this is where it gets very dangerous, right? Mm-hmm. This is where the debate that I think is probably the hottest debate in HR today begins, and I'm not sure where it ends, which is, where is the human in the human resources? And we are having more and more conversations about data. And when you think about a startup organization in particular, the startup organizations need to function in a more lean and fast-paced manner. So you're going to have fewer people, and you need to be much more thoughtful and strategic about how you place those people in the organization. However, if you start to rely too much on the data, then I push the question that you put out there earlier, Cathy, of, well, then what is ultimately the point of the HR department? If you're so focused or leaning so heavily on the predictive analytics, then technically over a short period of time, you should be able to have your managers understand and manage and curate and storytell that data. And so I think a lot about, and I'm equally curious about, then how does the human piece of it continue to be tweaked, and the people who are the HR business partner of the future, whatever that's called and however that looks, what is that profile?
Well, I think the first thing is HR leaders now need to be more data driven. That's the first part, right? Many of the HR leaders I speak to are running away in the opposite direction from it instead of running towards it. So when we first launched our HR analytics product as a business, it was for generalists. And, aside from Matt, actually, Matt's part of the series. He's going to be leading one of the sessions. So good luck, Matt. You're going to be speaking in front of over 70 vice presidents and heads of HR analytics in a few months' time. So that's going to be interesting for you. But as soon as we put it out, we had a few members attend it. I had and I'm sure Christina won't mind me saying, she's the vice president of HR of General Mills. And she said, Chris, this is so beyond. Yeah. Well, I attended 2 workshops, Chris, and I have no idea what's happening. But she's like, but I know I need to. But I know I need to educate myself. I need to understand this. So I think part of it, Jill, is that we have to face the fact that the role of a HR leader is changing, and it's inevitable. And you are going to have to stretch your own learning. And it is a really far away, actually, from a traditional skill set. It couldn't be any further away than going from soft skill, people focused, to tech, analytics, predictive, prescriptive. It's a tough challenge.
So I would argue they're complementary. So I know that kind of the brand that I've created for myself is that of a technology, data, HR professional. And that's certainly for me the foundation of what our practice looks like. But I want to be very clear on the distinction. So in a predictive analytics model, what we're doing is we're proactively interceding in issues before they become problems. Right. So from an employee perspective, right now, I'm a firefighter. If there's a problem, I send people to put the fire out. So there's already been pain experienced by somebody in the organization and potentially by multiple stakeholders in the organization by the point that we intercede. In the future, we're actually preventing those issues from happening, which will create a greater employee experience on a day-to-day basis and coach the managers proactively on scale to address those problems without having to do an investigation, coach a manager, terminate an employee, write the report, log it in the system. Like all those activities that we spend right now just reacting to things is time that I would rather spend proactively solving those issues. But I think when we talk about data and technology, I want to be very clear. Data and technology at our organization is the foundation, and it's the enabler of us to have more time to spend with our colleagues on the front line and to drive culture. Traditionally, with my current budget, I would have to have 2 or 3 times as many administrators just to manage all the data and all the systems and all the paper back and forth. Because we've gone entirely paperless and because we have data at the foundation of our model, I can take that finite amount of headcount and reallocate them to change management, business partner roles, storytelling, brand. Otherwise, they would have spent the whole time doing data entry. So technology for me is an enabler. I like technology because there's so much potential in it. But what really excites me is when the technology is there, now we can have some real fun and actually work with the humans in the organization and help them drive success in terms of succession and in terms of engagement.
So then before we run out of time, let's turn it back then to the world of startups. And
we got a bit carried away there, but this is directly aligned. This is where the startups are excelling.
Well, no, I think there's a nice connection, which is given all of that context for our colleagues that are listening to the show today that are in a role like Cathy's role, where they are leading the people function in a startup that is, let's say, 5 years or younger. And they have limited budget and resources on how to build the team and scale culture and talent in an organization. What do we think are the best ways to set up an HR organization?
Ooh, I'm going to use the old, I'll start, but I would say the old consulting answer is it really depends on what you want to achieve. So
I love it. I love that response. Yeah.
But I can share a little bit about, and it is about listening and understanding what the company needs at a certain amount of time. And we're still early on. So for a lot of hyper growth startups, for which there are so many right now, you need a talent acquisition engine. And I'm actually rebranding our talent acquisition team to be talent discovery, because I think that's what they really are doing. They're discovering talent internally, externally. They're looking under rocks. They're looking at different profiles. They're like really in that discovery phase. So I think you have to have that engine to help you get through that high growth, but be careful about overhiring in that department, right? Because that you come at the other end and that's not pleasant. So then you have the culture that you do need to co-create with your employees. And I would say give a bit more freedom to your employees to help you do that. Put some guardrails around it, but don't limit. And have the nuts and bolts piece stay pretty lean. And then the third piece for us is talent development. And this whole notion of how do you grow talent? You know, people constantly say, oh, we continue to outgrow talent at startups and then we shed them and we shed them. And I say, well, that's too bad, because I would love to find a way to actually re-engage people and coach them to take on new things. And so it really starts at the beginning. You have to hire those types of people that are just really smart at learning and continuing to grow with you as long as you can possibly have them. But for some people, that's 2 years. Some people, that's 3 or 4, right? So some people, that's 18 months. I hope it's not that. But those are the 3 kind of areas for us that I think are really important. It's the, discovering talent, the engine of culture and employee life cycle, and then the real folks who are helping to coach and grow the talent in that talent advisory way that we were talking about earlier.
Matthew?
I don't know. You're going to put that on the spot.
So first off, I love talent discovery. Cathy, you'll be maybe interested to know, I called our organization Talent Acceleration.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, we wanted to kind of give that action oriented. So Jill, I love Cathy's answer as well in terms of it depends. That's why I always go back to how we do things in HR. And I said this before on the show, every HR meeting I ever will have with my team, we'll talk about, the first slide will always be the 4 competencies that we employ in our organization, how we do HR, if you will. And those are really simple for us. The first one is simplicity. So give me 80% of your best and give it to me fast. So that's a guiding principle we have in our department, is simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. The second one for us is transparency and curiosity. So we always skew to providing more information than less information. And I want people on the team and in the organization to be curious about information and learning and development. And those are people that have success in a high growth, high paced growth organization. The third one for us is a bias for action. So HR sometimes has a bad reputation for being bureaucratic, slowing down progress, saying no to a lot of things. I want us to have a bias for action. If the question or the request from the business is inappropriate or misaligned with our culture, the answer will be yes. Have you thought about this as well in order to tweak it, to fit it into our culture, to fit it into our best practices, to make it compliant? And the last one for me is diversity and inclusion, which is more broad than just simply the demographics. It's diversity of thought. It's inclusion of different ways of thinking. It's taking best practices from all different types of organizations, big, small. And what I've been doing a lot lately is spending time contacting peers in other parts of the world where they have innovation in places they don't currently have it in North America. So I've been calling people in Asia Pacific talking about e-learning solutions, because in Australia and New Zealand right now, they're doing some amazing things with e-learning. Whereas if I have questions about AI, I'm calling the UK, because they're 5 to 7 years ahead of where we are in terms of leveraging AI in their traditional day-to-day HR models. So I think those 4 principles, that simplicity, that transparency and curiosity, the bias for action, and diversity and inclusion, Jill, those are the things that I apply in our current organization, and I would apply across any HR organization in the future.
Excellent.
I think Matt needs to write a book about all that. he's got it down. You like when I have Dave on the show, he always has like the 4 key points for everything. You ask him a question, he's like, the 4 key points of everything. It's fantastic. You love him. I think, Jill, do you want to add anything to that before we wrap up?
I was going to ask a hot seat question.
Go for it.
My hot seat question for today is, the way that we train dogs.
Okay, good start to the question. Jill, we've got 3 minutes and 42 seconds.
Okay.
The way that you train a dog to do something that you want them to do instead of doing something that they're doing is you do what's called a switch and replace. So if they're chewing on your sock, you take the sock out of their mouth and you replace it with
your hand.
With the tuft of Matt's hair, for example. But you put something in their mouth that you want them to chew on, and now they're happy and they're doing the right thing. So if you could, everyone, starting with Chris today, if you could do a switch and replace in the way that you do your job, what would you switch and replace?
I would switch. That's a tough question.
That's a really tough question.
Switch and replace all of the admin that I have to do, and I've replaced myself with my business partner Shane, so he can do all of the admin that I don't want to do, and all of the finance, and that would make my life a lot easier. So that's what I'd do. Shane's gonna listen to this and kill me, but
I thought you were gonna switch and replace Matt and me.
Oh, don't be so. That's what I'll do. I'll switch and replace all of the things that stop me from focusing on the strategic tasks, the value add. I would switch and replace all of those administrative, time-consuming, manual tasks and give them all to my lovely business partner, Shane, for him to do all of them, or to someone else, really, to hire someone in. I really need to hire. As a startup, that's something that is holding me back. I need to hire someone in to focus on all that and automate that. So I'd switch and replace them and automate as much as possible, which is what I'm working on right now.
You could call me,
I've got Zapier. I don't need you, all right? I've got Zapier. Zapier solves everything. It can connect anything together and automate anything. So we're replaced by Zapier. Matt?
Mine's exactly the same answer. Having been in an HR function that was entirely paper-based and now being in one where we don't have any paper, it is as great as it sounds. So if I was to replace anything from an HR organization, for most people, it's get rid of your paper, get rid of your manual administration,
Yeah.
get into the new world where all that work still has to happen, and it's happening in an automated way. And we can actually focus on the things that most of us joined this profession to do in the first place, which was to enable and to inspire and to engage people. But you can't do that if you're spending 7 hours a day behind a spreadsheet. So Jill, that's what I would replace.
We've left Cathy with literally 1 minute and 10 seconds
You
to
all
go.
said it well. I'm in the process of hiring an executive assistant. I need help. You know what it is? It's the challenge of finding the time, doing external things like this, internal things, like where's the balance there? And that's why I need somebody who's following me and chasing me and saying, no, that's not where you should spend your time, reminding me. Because I'm doing that myself, and it's tough. The first 3 months are tough because I want to do things like this, but it can be tricky.
Fantastic. Well, I think I'm just going to get cut off in 10 seconds. So thank you everyone for watching, for tuning in. Sorry, the live stream didn't happen this time, but you're going to get it anyway. We're going to share this on LinkedIn. If you've got any questions, message all of us on LinkedIn. Cathy, thank you very much for joining us and to share your experience.
For having me.
And
Thank you, Cathy.
good seeing you again, Jill and Matt.
Thank
I'll see you
you.
same time next week.